Thank you for checking out Scotty's Hobbies. Today we're going to be replacing the front brake pads and rotors on this 2009 Ford Fusion. This will be the same, if not very similar, to other makes and models such as the 06 to 2012 Ford Fusion, the 06 to 2011 Mercury Milan, the 07 to 2012 Lincoln MKZ, and the 2006 Lincoln Zephyr. If this video does help you out, please make sure you leave a comment below and let me know what vehicle it did. Also, make sure you look for links in the description below to purchase parts and tools shown in this video, and comment below if you have any questions. Tell everybody about me. I should have a video covering most vehicles on the road with some type of vehicle maintenance, so check out the video library as well. Let's get started with this one really quick. Using a T40 Torx bit, we're going to loosen these production screws on the rotor. These, when you install them, have a proper torque specification too, so make sure you stay tuned for that. First, if you don't know or if you need a good visual aid on brake pads, or if you need brake pads, these gauges right here are very, very helpful. So make sure you look for a link in the description to purchase those as well. Using a thin crescent wrench and a 15mm 6.38 socket, we're going to remove the slider pin bolts, caliper slider pin bolts that is. These also have a proper torque specification when you're reinstalling, and we'll cover those at the end as well. Make sure you look for a link in the description for the pads, and if you are going to buy pads or do this on your own, make sure you get good ceramic pads. Lifetime warranty preferably. After you remove both of these bolts, I use a bungee cord or something to tie up the caliper onto the spring or shock, whatever you got. I don't like to leave the caliper just hanging on the brake hose. On this brake assembly, you have these little springs on the top of the brake pads. These little springs cause the pads to release from the rotor when you let off of the brake pedal. You can see these brake pads aren't bad, or they don't visually look bad. The problem with this one was the braking would vibrate, or the car would vibrate, the steering wheel would vibrate when she hit the brakes coming off the freeway. Prior to coming to me, she had a friend put some pads on. Well, actually, prior to coming to the state, she had a friend put some pads on so she could make it here. But this car has lots of problems. You can see I don't let the caliper just hang from the hose. I use a bungee cord and just take the weight off of the hose and let it hang up here out of the way and nothing on the hose itself. You don't want the hose to break, cause yourself more problems on a DIY job, especially when you're trying to save some money and some time. You can see it just hangs up there. Now what we're going to do is remove the brake caliper bracket, or on this vehicle they call it a brake caliper anchor plate. Other makes, they have different names for them, so that's it on this one. This plate or a caliper bracket shouldn't be too tight. This one is actually oddly tight, you could see, and I try to use tools that you would use in your driveway or at home to do this job. Sometimes I have to use the air gun. That's why it's just sitting there in the background. But this right here was a 15mm over torqued. We'll go over proper torque specs at the end. Remove both of these bolts holding the caliper bracket on, and we're going to set them off to the side. Let's use a little bit of editing and speed this process up. Now this job should take you about 1.5 hours to 2 hours to do both sides. The book time on this, I believe, called for 1.2 hours, and that's having a lift, having the proper tools, and done it plenty of times in the past. So it doesn't take too long. If you had this job done at a local shop, you would be looking around $250-ish for the brake pads being replaced. If you're going to go all the way into having the rotors, you could go up into a little bit over the $300 range. So you could save yourself a couple bucks by doing this at home. When you get your caliper bracket off, just take a glance at it. Look how everything looks. Make sure nothing is rubbing. You don't have any broken boots on the caliper slider pins. Just take a visual look at it. Now that the caliper and the bracket is off, we could remove the rotor using the T40 Torx bit on the 3/8 drive. Going to remove these screws all the way. Set them off to the side. Don't lose them. You can see right here, T40 Torx. Make sure you use the proper size. You don't want to round those out and make it way harder to get them out with the easy out or something like that. So make sure you're using the proper tools. This one, the rotor was seized pretty good to the hub assembly. So if you have problems like this, don't be too afraid, but make sure you take a glance at everything else. The ABS sensor on the hub, make sure the hub itself is good, the bearings are good. This vehicle ended up having a lot of problems. So the brakes were not the only thing needed. Make sure you install the rotor in the proper clocked direction so your assembly screws will easily go in. You want to take the rotor back off and put it back on. Make sure everything gets aligned properly when you first put it on. Now when you tighten these up, they don't need to be too tight at all. They actually do have a torque specification. If you want to do that now, go ahead and do so. The torque spec on this is 177 inch-pounds. So you could convert that over to foot-pounds, and it's probably something really light, like 8 or 9 pounds. I haven't done that math yet. So go ahead and comment below if you want to help me out on that one. Not all cars use the production screws like this, so I don't know if it's the most important thing to have these on, but I always replace them if I can. If not, try to replace them if possible. But if you lose them, can't do it for some reason, it's not the end of the world, I do not think. I tightened mine down hand tight. I did not use a torque wrench to tighten them down, but it is important in my opinion to use them so your rotor's not flopping around while you're trying to install the caliper. It makes it so much easier. If you don't have these production screws, put a lug nut or two on the lug nuts right there to hold the rotor in place. These are the brake pads we ended up putting on this vehicle. I'm not recommending that you get these exact ones, but this is just a per se of what you should get. Good ceramic brake pads. These have a lifetime warranty on them, but that, I don't know if it is like, say your brake pads get a little bit low, can you take them down and just get new pads? Is that wear and tear covered on the lifetime warranty? I always get a different opinion, and I always ask when I pick these up. So when one of these get low, we're going to take it in. You can see ceramic pads, they already have the silencer shims on the back. You don't have to buy those extra or anything. So when you get good pads, everything should be included. Your shims on the back, the shims that go on the caliper bracket, and some of them come with some grease, and the spring that goes on the top of the pads is included in the set. You can see all of it. It is super important to replace all this in my opinion, especially if you're going to be doing this brake job at home on your own, trying to save some bucks. When you start taking a little bit of extra pride in your vehicle, trust me, your vehicle will treat you way better and last a lot longer. When you're done watching this video, make sure you tell your friends and family about me. I probably have a video covering a maintenance procedure on their own vehicle. When you start taking care of your vehicle and maintaining it properly, it doesn't just last longer, it treats you way better. You'll go from point A to point B much more and much longer. So when you take care of your vehicle, you gain pride in your ride, and it treats you way better. Now that we have this caliper bracket off, we're removing all of the old hardware on this. The silencers, I think those are, or the shims. This one goes on the top of the bracket. It holds the brake pad down, or gives a little bit of downward force. And then you have the two that go on the side that hold the side of the brake pad itself. The shims on the side of the pads are directional, so make sure you install the correct ones. You don't want any of the shims rubbing on the rotor and having to end up taking everything back apart and putting it on the proper way. So take note of what you're doing. When you're removing everything, I like to take pictures of everything as I go too, just so I have a reference point when I get to where I'm reinstalling something. I'm like, oh gosh, I forgot. Oh, here it is. So make sure you take lots of pictures. While you're replacing your shims, take a good look at your slider pin boots right here. We're going to replace the boots if you have any tears, rips, or anything like that. These ones look good, so we're going to use them again. Boots are usually not covered or included in the hardware kit. Sometimes they are though, but if you have any moisture looking on your boots, just replace them. Don't even worry about it. Using synthetic brake caliper grease, lube these up pretty nice liberally. You don't want to have it to where grease is coming out of the boot, so lube it up, put it in there, force it in and out a few times, make sure it freely slides. You don't want these to seize up and cause the caliper to press sideways on your brake pads. You get horrible braking in that case. We're going to clean both of them off really good. I'm using a nice clean towel. Sometimes if they're really dirty, I'll use a dirtier towel to get the grease off, and a cleaner towel like this one to polish it up. Make sure you're using some high temp grease, something that won't break down or get milky inside when they get really hot. Brakes operate at a super high temperature. Lube it up pretty good. Again, you don't want grease coming out of the boot, so push it in your caliper a few times. Make it move like it would when you press your brake pedal. And if you do have any excess grease coming out, just wipe it off. Won't be any issues. Now that we have the caliper ready to be installed, go ahead and put it on the hub. Using your 15mm bolts right here, you're going to tighten your caliper bracket down to 66 foot-pounds. That's 66 foot-pounds on the caliper bracket, or like I said in this one, the caliper bracket anchor plate. 66 foot-pounds using a 15mm, preferably 6-point socket. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch torque wrench that is reduced down to a 3/8, but you could use a 3/8 torque wrench on both of these, the bracket right here and the caliper slider pin coming up shortly. When you're using your torque wrench, I used to go to 3 clicks, but a lot of people complained. I did some research, and you shouldn't do that. Your best way is to get one of those bar torque wrenches and just go to where your proper torque specification is and move on. So in this case, with the clicking one click and you're done. Keep moving on. So 3 clicks, don't do it. Tighten it up properly before we move on. If you run into any questions or concerns, make sure you comment below and get a hold of me. I might be able to help you out pretty quick. Usually I answer questions on Fridays and Saturdays. Grab your brake pads and install them. Make sure if they are directional or if you had a wear indicator, it's in the proper location. When I disassemble everything, I like to take pictures. Make sure you take a picture of every process or every step, so when you're reinstalling and you get to a point and you have a question, you have all your answers right at your fingertips. Makes it much easier for yourself. These pads were a little bit of a pain in the butt to line up and get installed. Took a little bit of my patience, but finally got everything in. Make sure they move freely in the caliper bracket. You don't want them to get hampered, or you want the movement to get hampered and be stuck sideways and not press on the rotor at all. Before we compress the piston back into the caliper, make sure you remove the cap on the reservoir. When you push fluid back into the reservoir, you want it to be able to go somewhere and not blow any seals out. Might leak on the floor in this case, but that's a way better scenario than blowing a seal out. Using a caliper compressor, you can see this is a little cheapo one I got from the local parts store many moons ago. I think it was like $10. They have some fancier ones which I use in other videos, but if you need something like this, look for a link in the description as well. You can see the bungee cord in the back was holding up the caliper, and when we're done here, we're just going to slide it right onto the bracket. So push the piston all the way in as far as it could go. You might want to give it a second when you push it all the way in, just let it marinate for a moment there. Before you put the caliper back on the bracket, make sure you put your springs in the top of the brake pads. I've forgotten these a few times. It makes the pads release off the rotor much faster, and the pads last a lot longer if you do not forget these. I know from experience, trust me. So I highly recommend you put those back on. Again, if you lose them for some reason and it's nighttime, you can't get any more, it's not the biggest thing in the world if they're not there, but always reinstall everything the way you took it apart. With the piston completely compressed back into the caliper, slide the caliper over the brake pads with the springs, and using these very weak fine threaded bolts, we are going to fasten the caliper onto the bracket. When you tighten these down, you're going to use a 6-point or preferably a 6.14mm socket. I'm using a 3/8 drive torque wrench to tighten these down. If you don't have a torque wrench, just make sure you don't over tighten them because these bolts are very weak. They're aluminum and fine thread, so 20 foot-pounds is the torque specification on these. Again, using my thin crescent wrench to hold the slider pin, I'm going to tighten down the bolts. I'm going to torque them down to 20 foot-pounds. 1 click on each side. If you go for those extra clicks, you might be tighten it down too much and just snap the bolt. I haven't done that, but I had a lot of people let me know that I could do that, and I did some research and they were right. So get 1 click if you have the click style torque wrench. If you need torque wrenches, make sure you look for links in the description below to purchase those. I will do my best to give you some pretty good accurate links. This is what the brakes should like after you tighten down your caliper and straighten the wheel out. But you're not done yet. Before you go too far, you need to hop in the car and press the brake pedal 3 times until it gets nice and firm. I think I did it 4 times on this one. But your brake job is pretty much done. With proper torque specification and time, this job doesn't take long. And again, you're going to gain some pride in your ride when you take care of your vehicle, and it'll last you much longer. Here, before we go on our trip, pressing the brake pedal in until I get a nice firm pedal, and then I'm going to go tighten up the fluid reservoir and go on a test drive. Pretty simple. One of these videos right here might help you out. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next hopefully helpful video.